Welcome to Charge Overland. In this video, I'm going to cover some easy ways to save range while you're overlanding, camping, or even just out on a road trip. The Rivian has a pretty solid 300 plus miles of range, so everything in this video is just about maximizing that range. You can definitely go out on an adventure and not really worry about any of these things I'm about to show you. But if you want to optimize your efficiency with a few pretty easy steps, then keep watching. All right, the first topic is tire pressure. This is a pretty easy one, and it applies whether you're driving an EV or not. Generally, when you go off-roading, you lower your tire pressure, and the same applies to the Rivian. When you air down your tires, you get better traction, softer ride, it's easier on the suspension, and it also prevents trails from getting washboarded. So there's a lot of good reasons to air down your tires when you're off-road. But I will be the first to admit, when I get back onto paved roads, I'm guilty of not always airing back up. So I wanted to understand, how is this affecting my efficiency? So I went back to the route that I used for my rooftop tent range video. Basically, I made sure all of my settings were the same. I had the truck in conserve mode. At the low ride height, my HVAC stayed the same for both tests, and the only variable was my tire pressure. So I aired my tires down to 31 PSI, which is the recommended pressure from Rivian for off-roading, tested the out and back route, and then aired my tires back up to right around 48 PSI and ran the same route again. The results from this test definitely were not surprising. It was for sure more efficient to have the tires at the proper PSI, but it was interesting to see the numbers. So it came out to a 5% hit to efficiency when the tires were at 31 PSI versus what they should be at 48. Now, this isn't a massive number, but if you're on a longer trip or if you're on the highway for a long period between off-road trails, I would definitely recommend airing your tires back up. It's probably safer that way, and you're going to get better range. Next, let's talk outlets. The Rivian has a ton of them, which is great, but I wanted to see how much battery I was losing when I had the outlets turned on. I didn't expect it to be much, but I gotta say, I was a little disappointed with the number. It's quite a bit more than you would think. So very simply, for the first step of this test, I wanted to get a baseline. How much battery drain was I going to see over a 12-hour period with the Rivian parked in my garage under ideal conditions? I did this test 2 times and saw the same result, which was a 1% battery drain over a 12-hour period. So obviously the next step was to do the same test with the outlets on. Now, I didn't plug anything into the outlets, I just turned them on. And over a few tests, I saw anywhere from 3 to 5% battery drain. Now, I wish I could explain to you how this is happening, but honestly, I'm not sure. I'm hoping this is a software thing that can be updated, but it's kind of a big deal if you're out on a longer trip and you're trying to save range. So here are the numbers from both tests. I think I'm going to use my outlets a little more sparingly if I'm going a long time between charges. Hopefully this is something that gets updated in the near future. This next tip comes from a cool built-in feature in the camp mode UI of the Rivian. There are actually a couple modes built into the camp UI that are meant for saving some battery and range. I'm not going to get into the full camp UI in this video. I do have a separate video that covers that. But for this video, I want to focus on one specific setting, and that is the stay off feature. Basically what this does is turn all the features off, gear guard, outlets, screens, and lets your truck conserve as much energy as possible while still letting you lock and unlock it. So I tried this mode out first at home just to see how it worked. You may have seen a short video that I posted on this on my Instagram, but the result was pretty awesome. Over a 12-hour period overnight, I saw 0% battery drain. The following weekend, I was out on a camping trip and I used it both nights. The first night I saw, again, 0% battery drain. The second night, it was a little warmer and still only saw 1% drain. So here are the numbers for comparison. It's not a huge difference, but over the course of a longer multi-day trip, this could definitely save you a lot of battery. Now, obviously, there's nothing that says you have to be camping to use the camp mode settings. So if you were, say, at the airport, leaving your truck for a week, this is something I would turn on just to save battery while you're not using it. Another cool feature of the Rivian is that it has a bunch of different drive modes for different scenarios, and understanding how to use these is really important for maximizing your efficiency. So there are 3 drive modes that I use most of the time. Those are Conserve, All-Purpose, and Off-Road All-Terrain. And I wanted to do another test on these settings just to compare what the efficiency was between each of them. So quick disclaimer on this test, ideally I would have liked to test a route that had both dirt and paved section on it to compare the drive modes in those different settings. I didn't have that for this test, but I did use a consistent loop that I tested multiple times in each setting, and it should give a pretty valid, rough idea of what the efficiency difference is between each of the settings. Now, quickly to cover the settings I used, I kept my HVAC the same for all of the tests. I ran a 2-mile loop 3 times in each of the drive modes to try to eliminate any little nuances that may happen in each of the loops. Then it was time to run the test in all 3 modes. And as expected, Conserve was definitely the most efficient, followed by All-Purpose, and then Off-Road All-Terrain. So looking at the numbers, it's a pretty natural progression of efficiency from Conserve to All-Purpose to Off-Road. So how do you use these in the best way when you're out on a trip? So I'm definitely using Conserve a lot when I'm on the highway on longer drives. It turns off 2 of the 4 motors in the Rivian and essentially converts your truck into a front-wheel drive vehicle. So you are going to get some uneven tire wear if you're using this mode too often. But for highway driving, I think it's great and it's an easy way to save some range. Now, when you start getting off-road, the natural reaction is to put the truck in off-road mode. But there's a lot of terrain like dirt roads, fire roads, areas where you're not on really gnarly trails, where it's just fine to leave the truck in all-purpose. It's going to be a little more efficient that way, and you can leave the off-road mode for situations where you really need it. All right, those are 4 pretty easy steps to maximize your efficiency. There's a few other things I want to cover. Some are in your control and some are not, but they're good things to pay attention to when you're thinking about range and efficiency. The first is just to be aware of what type of terrain you're going to be driving through on your trip. If you're going to be going up large mountains, you're definitely going to lose some efficiency. On the flip side, because the Rivian has electric motors, you actually regenerate energy when you're going downhill. On a recent trip up to Big Bear, I actually left a trail with 47% battery, covered 50 miles, and got to my next destination only using 3% battery. So this was pretty cool. It was mostly downhill for that drive. Next is just your driving style. I know a lot of people, when they first get an EV, are just on the accelerator every chance they get, and it's a blast. And I'm not necessarily suggesting you don't do that, but just don't expect to get the maximum range out of your vehicle if you're driving it in that way. Also, while we're talking about driving style, how fast you drive on the highway is obviously going to make a pretty big difference to your efficiency as well. Driving 65 or 70 versus 80 or 85 is going to have a pretty dramatic impact on your range, just like it would in a gas-powered vehicle. Now, one unique thing with electric vehicles is a negative one. There's really no denying it, and that's that temperature definitely plays a factor in how your battery is going to perform. So if you're in an area where it's going to be really cold or very hot, it definitely will affect your battery and your range. So just be aware of that when you're out on trips with extreme temperatures. All right, the last thing I want to cover is obviously the gear that you put on your truck is going to affect your aerodynamics and therefore your range as well. The Rivian has a great modular crossbar system that you can mount a lot of stuff to, and I use this myself for my rooftop tent and my max tracks right now, but it definitely affects the range a little bit. And even before my Rivian, with my Wrangler, I had plenty of gear loaded on that thing, and I was lucky to get 12 miles per gallon. So just another thing to pay attention to if you want to maximize your range. All right, let's go through a summary of all the things we covered in this video. First is tire pressure. If you're airing your tires down to go off-roading, when you get back on a paved road, air back up and you're looking at about a 5% increase in efficiency. Next, the outlets, if you need them, obviously turn them on, but otherwise, leaving them off will save you a significant amount of range. If you're camping or just staying in one location for a longer period of time, using the stay off mode is going to prevent quite a bit of battery drain over time. Also, selecting the right drive mode can make a big difference with your range. And paying attention to the last 4 things I mentioned can also help with planning out your trips and optimizing your efficiency. So lastly, I want to say these are some tips that I'm using for my trips personally, but you don't have to do all these things to go out and have an adventure with your Rivian. They can definitely help extend your range, which is great. And I would encourage you to pick a few of these things, give them a try yourself, and let me know how they work for you. Also, if you've got any tips for how you improve efficiency, feel free to add a comment below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, check out some of my other videos, and as always, lots more adventure to come.